Okay, so you had another question, so I just want to touch upon this one. So my question is that I care a lot for my significant other and I want the best for her, even though we're long distance. And so it's been 3 years that you've been seeing each other, and you were, it sounds like, off for about 7 or 8 months where you were not technically together.
That's
And
correct.
so, okay. And so your question is there a way for us to remain strong friends and have authentic character, integrity, and honesty and ethical moral values, held to the best of our ability, not perfect, but as well as you can, and then still maintain a loving type of responsibility of each other's best interests moving forward? Okay. Is that the question? Did I
Well,
read that correctly?
yeah, it's just, but you're kind of covered a significant, I mean, a part of it, just throughout this. It was, and I can be answering my own question, but and maybe it just comes down. To me, it may be a dependence issue. I don't know if Neil Strauss faces that, where, maybe it's my guilt I have for maybe past hurts I've brought on by my promiscuity, by my player mentality, by objectification, and 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 that's an over response by me. I don't know. I'm not here to speculate on that right here for this sake of the question, but I don't want to avoid, hide, or deny reality.
Mm-hmm.
But my compassion is a legit thing. I've worked on that to be a non-cold, and don't respond to my, don't respond with stupid sex or drugs or another things that are hiddenly available to do when I'm not feeling so hot to trot because of my inability to have an intimate, stable connection. Or that's not to go down that road too far, but yeah, it's just and to, I guess, to couch that is that since I've put those questions onto you, I've reached a couple of centering points because I have hired a therapist myself, and we've been making some pretty big progress about, hey, care is legit. My behavior is also legit. Don't go be promiscuous because you're no longer got a tag, or the way ego can think. And I'm working really. In fact, I hired another specialist here in town to make sure I snip that in the bud, because it's coming. I can tell I want to go act out, like Neil Strauss might say if he was being transparent, because okay, I feel compassionate and good. I'm treating this person who is significant to me really well, but I need to go party. It's time for me to go, pull my doors down with somebody else. And so in the name of that transparency, I know it can be problematic, and then it cuts me off from being able to do exactly what this call is about, which is how do I pursue joy and find, and I use the word pattern making like an artist. How do I make better emotional patterns? Because I mean, that kind of almost feels like I'm taking away the party from myself as a response to when I free myself up from some emotional thing, and I'm free to go do that. And so I guess that's a gist of that question is just, targeted at maybe not being, answering the fullness of my role in somebody's life in a very nice way while not acting out in my old ways.
Well, I think it's interesting, and it's also a complex kind of thing, because there's no judgment, at least from my end. There's no judgment around promiscuity, right? Like, there's no judgment around wanting to have sex. There's no judgment around casual sex. There's no judgment around sex being a form of release. And so I just want to put that out there. Whether to have sex or not to have sex, to my mind, isn't necessarily a measure of anything. What's the measure is your relationship to the act as you are performing it, right? So if you are feeling in the moment that you have sex that this is something I am connected to in this moment, this is someone I am connected with in this moment, it doesn't necessarily have to be this big, heavy, deep commitment, but we're both enjoying each other right now, and I'm feeling fully present and active and participatory in this. And it's not a compulsive thing I'm doing to escape some other feeling that I don't want to entertain.
That's
right?
it. That's the tough part, because if it is, then integrity is going to, for me, have to step in and say, okay, well, right, that I can, but that's the tricky part, and you really hit it on the head. But go ahead. That's great. Right.
So for me, it's, we sometimes kind of get caught up in the, the observable conditions of things, right? Like to have sex or not to have sex, or whatever it might be. And really, to my mind, it's like, whatever it means to you, it's got to come from you, right? Not from whatever society says about who you can have sex with and when you can do it and how long you have to wait and what your partner's going to feel about it or what your ex-partner is going to feel about it. And, it's less about that, and it's more about your own relationship to it. So that's something that I would have you explore, before you act, and in whatever you decide to do. And even if you act and then later you're like, oh, I wish I didn't do that. I did do this thing and it was a compulsive sort of escape from what I didn't want to pay attention to or whatever. Then also to realize that that's part of your process, and beating yourself up for that is just going to perpetuate the same cycle that led you to needing to compulsively escape yourself, because you're beating yourself up all the time. Right.
Correct.
So the other piece that came up a little bit, and I'm just going to touch on it a little bit, was, concern about, am I honoring my role in this other person's life? Like, am I honoring what I meant to this other person? And that's kind of a boundary question where you kind of have to decide, okay, that was her experience and she's responsible for contextualizing your role in her life, and you're responsible for contextualizing her role in your life. But you cannot take on responsibility for organizing her feeling states. It's like you can, I think when you've used the word integrity a lot, and so that sounds like that's an important thing for you, in which case, it's kind of like that values sort of thing. If integrity is something that is of high value to you, then you want to think about, what is it to act with integrity? But can you act with integrity without sacrificing yourself and your boundaries, right? Because the need to, like, when you get out of a relationship and there's this feeling of relief and you're like, oh, okay, now I can go do and be who I really am, right?
Well, or go play, whatever, something of that nature, right?
Whatever
right.
it is. Usually that's a boomerang to something that you have been doing that you weren't comfortable with, right? Like, that you've been straining, or there's some kind of tension or strain that you've been under. And
it's usually to go act out sexually. My book, I'm talking about Neil Strauss.
That comes after some strain or tension that you were holding during whatever came before.
Holding the stress of commitment for long term. That's right. In my case, long distance. It's like, okay, I turned, right. I myself was wanting to see if I could even hold myself up to the standard, because because of the I drive a town car airport around town service, so I'm constantly exposed. We all have exposed to opportunities to act out in whatever our behavior of choice is. So I just want to be careful that, but the real golden nugget here is that, and this is that I may have, and I can't possibly train myself to be so relatively happy with myself using the Albert Ellis tools that I've answered my justification for promiscuous behavior to the, hey, it's fun, I'll take it when I get it, I'll have a blast with it, I'll stay healthy and safe. But other than that, man, hey, this is a party. Get rich, get good looking, and enjoy the party. And if love finds me and it works, well, then it does. But until then, why fret about it? Whereas if I choose to sell myself short by, like you just said, the expectation of having a long distance relationship and this relief that I feel, and answering it back with another trick in my taxi, if you want to be frank about it, okay, honoring it back with another, low base, actions, and staying in there. See, that's hurting me, and that so the tension is actually me on myself. I want to make it clear that it's me trying to improve here.
Well, that act is not. It's not the act that's low in base. It's your opinion of the act. You think that act is low in base. So because you think that way, it is that way for you in your experience, which suggests that. So this is my question.
Yeah.
If the sentiment is, I'm going to make money, have fun, party, live it up, do it all and just see if love finds me. if that sentiment is a true expression of what you really feel and what you really want and desire, then it will work for you. If it's an expression, if it's something that you're telling yourself because underneath it, there's another story that says, well, that's what you're capable of, and you're not really capable of deep and abiding intimacy and love. And if you do actually think that people who are, let's say, more selective in their sexual partners or faithful, whatever the construct is, if you somehow tie that in with integrity, because that sounds like that's a high value term for you. If you tie those things together and you think, well, that's not really in my makeup, then I can't, so therefore I can't have that. So I'm just going to focus on these other things. And if it finds me, then okay. Then what happens is that creates a dissonance in, for lack of a better word, your vibration. Right. So if that is really truly where you are in your life right now, and that's really truly in alignment with your desires, then we don't need to be on this call. if it's not, if there's really beneath that, if there is a yearning, but then there's a conflict between what you can perceive to be in behavior that is of integrity, and you think that somehow you're not going to fit into that. That's one element of integrity that you're striving for that you can't quite touch. And if you just had that, then you could accomplish this thing, but it's not there for you. So I'm just going to do what I know how to do best. And that is to, have fun and sleep around and make money. Right. So there's no right or wrong here. There's no base action that diminishes you in any way. It's all the way that you are perceiving it and writing that narrative for yourself. So if you have a trick in a taxi and you walk away and you're like, wow, that was fun. This is in no way impeding my journey towards having deepening intimacy with partners. This was just part of the journey I'm on and really in alignment, and I'm having a blast. Then yes. But if you walk away from that and you're just like, oh, why did I do that? I've been trying so hard to clean up my act. This is yet another example of how I don't have enough integrity to have a committed relationship, and no one's ever going to want me because I can't be faithful and blah, 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 blah. Then that's a different narrative that you're constructing around your experiences. And then you're going to create more conflict around it. Do you see what I mean?
Well, you're hitting on the head. And see and I have that. This is exactly what you're saying. It's journaled out because when I did live in this lifestyle, and I say that because it's great. Neil Strauss came up because, and several dating, Joshua Pellicer, the Tao of Badass, another one. He's another guy, has a website, and I joined that for a while. And the first line of the book is going to tell you how to get laid, but you're not going to have a relationship. He's very clear, and he sold millions of people, like Neil Strauss, The Game. And where did the book? It's in an insane asylum. He went crazy in the book. The guy that opens up, he's suicidal. Because I live where, hey, there's no guilt and shame. I mean, I lost that when I got in Albert Ellis' work. And I read his book, Sex and the Liberated Man, and all of a sudden I had 3 girls line up in one day. Oh, they just got in my car and wanted to go inside with me. Like that 3. I was like, where did this happen? My consciousness had shifted, and so I was walking in the reality of a player. But I'm just saying, or offensive. I'm not trying to offend anybody. But for the sake of,
they can take care of their own offense. Don't you worry.
I love it.
Other people can take care of their own offense.
That's great. And and tying that into how you mentioned the narrative of myself, I actually am trying to, and I admit, because transformation, like with changing my ideas around money, huge. I got way out of debt. I mean, I understand how conflicted the beliefs and still may be resonating in some fashion. And you really called me out, and I want to say thank you, because if the 2 narratives underneath the act of seeking, whether it be sex or relationship, the point is that when I fall down, I lose character discernment skills. I've noticed that when I choose to quote whore around, well, I can no longer even discern. And then it becomes so. I share with you that it's not necessarily because am I in alignment with how fun and joy. There's no guilt and shame, but I'm looking at the greater problem it creates, lack of character discernment. And then the next thing you know, I'm 43 right now. Well, I'm going to be, if I keep up at this pace, just as I may have money, and I may have some health, but emotionally, I see it going down that road. So I want to just really say, yes, I like being called out. I'm risking to try these these less promiscuous paths to because you talk about somebody who can't make love, you're looking at them. I've came a long way. Okay, so yes, call me out on the inner conflict. And am I forcing myself to change? Yes, to a degree. There's some force, because I don't want to go down that road that I'm starting to describe.
Well, this is kind of you're kind of touching upon like what I think of as it's a form of addiction, right? So like what you're describing is, so I tend to define addiction as any kind of short-term escape that kind of generates some momentum that distracts you from whatever your true desires are. So if your true desire is to establish some emotional connections because you see yourself a few years from now having kind of an emotionally vacant life, if that's what okay. So the desire is to have an emotionally fulfilling life, right?
That's correct.
Right.
Yes.
And so in this way, and it's a bit tricky because I don't want to qualify what you're doing as bad, because anytime we qualify things as good and bad, we get stuck into this kind of, we create a friction there. I prefer to think of it as contrast, right? So what you've witnessed over time is that when you find yourself falling into, I'm going to use your word, promiscuous behaviors, that there's some mechanism going on there that's like almost like a drug, right? Like there's it's almost like getting a hit, and that hit sort of assuages whatever that tension has been prior to that. So it could be a feeling of wanting the thing and worrying that you're not going to get it, right? Or that you're not capable.
Right.
Maybe
because you don't, and you may not get it, so go get some now. Right. It's like pornography. Hey, just turn it on, man. Just go have a nice session. Hey, don't think about getting real with people. Just make it fantasy. It's quick. It's there. It's now. Yeah.
And and chemically it acts on, similar parts of the brain as attachment and also drugs. So, the way what you are describing, and this is what I mean by, and the reason I bring up love addiction is because I believe that love addiction and sex addiction, although sex addiction is usually associated more with like kind of avoidant behaviors, but they're really just two ends of the same stick. So the love avoidance has kind of an emotional sort of craving, right? And so they get into relationships and what their high is the fantasy and the idealization, right? Like pouring all their hopes, heart, dream, overgiving into a partner, and then kind of feeding off the fantasy of that. So that fantasy generates a lot of momentum for them, and that distracts them from what perhaps their self-opinion might be, and also from what the very human flaws might be of their partner, right? Because if they were to acknowledge those things, then it starts this whole domino effect where there's a threat of abandonment underneath it all, right? But there's an addiction there as well. I mean, there's a certain amount of energy and power and momentum tied up in that. Now, I think that for the sex addict, there's a charge tied up in that. So for the love addict, the charge is tied up in their emotions and the way that they affectually communicate. For the sex addict, there's a charge in there too, and it becomes embodied. And then when they have sex, and I'm not going to say all the time because sex to my mind is never the same every time, but there is that experience where sometimes when they have sex, it's like a discharge of that energy that's been stored up and that anxiety that's been stored up, and that's surrounding whatever the underlying narrative is there. And so the research says that oftentimes it's connected to having the experience of being enmeshed with a parent, and that means that in essence, the sex act is kind of like a physical way of trying to create a severance, like that you're using the body to try to sever that feeling of enmeshment, but it never quite goes away that way because the enmeshment isn't, it's embedded in your wiring. It's part of your psychic and emotional makeup, and it's intolerable. So we use the sex as a way of trying to physically break that bond, but then we are afraid of breaking that bond because that means we would betray the person we're enmeshed with, and that's our primary attachment figure. And so we dissociate emotionally in that moment because we are, in essence, protecting the enmeshed experience, because even though paradoxically at the same time we're trying to sever it. So that's what we talk about when we talk about, like, disorganized or fearful avoidant kind of behaviors, is that it's a degree of ambivalence that we're experiencing, in the way we're interacting with people. And so to my mind, it's useful to kind of talk about them as somewhat separate, being like love addict or love avoidant, or, anxiously attached or avoidantly attached, because, we can talk a little bit more specifically about like what end of the stick we're dealing with. But to my mind, it's two ends of the same stick. And that's probably why we see oftentimes people being kind of magnetized to each other that struggle with, the sort of inverse of a similar issue. Like the love addict is searching for enmeshment, and then the love avoidant is like trying to get away from enmeshment while at the same time trying to recreate it.
You really called that out, and I got to say thank you, because I'm looking forward to hearing that again in some form or fashion, because, and by the way, I've been porn free for over 2 years. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal today and age. Everybody's on Pornhub, but I have had, increased amounts of temptation. But again, you really address, and of course, temptation's there for a reason. The birds and the bees are there for a reason. It's a dance. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, not to say that I haven't had an incredible 2 and 3 years with my significant other. I mean, a whole new level of relating. I mean, I accomplished a lot, but I'm braving to go another distance here, another level of vulnerability, because I don't think any guy who's going to listen to this is going to like the way I got called out. I mean, it takes but I'm going to accept that. Everything with my family of origin is like stress. When I associate avoiding, especially the mother bond, of course. In fact, it's a relief, has been, and Albert Ellis helped me with that. It's been a relief to not hear from her for several years. In fact, it was almost like quitting cocaine or heroin. When I quit my mom, it was like the fog was nothing compared to drugs. I mean, the fog of war, it lifted. You really hit it, girl. I mean, maybe this talking, whoever hears it, is starting this path of my turnaround to give back like you are. I hate to say take crap and turn it into ice cream, but because I hope you never have to make crap to begin with. You really call that out in the way these dynamics are working, and so I just admit it. I'm aware of it, and want to say thanks to that.
Thank you for your willingness to be here on this call and to be so open about the things that you're struggling with, because you're not alone. A lot of people are struggling with these things, and which is partly why I want to have these conversations, because I think that there can be, I know you mentioned you've been working through that, but I think for a lot of people, there can be a lot of guilt and shame and internalized, criticism about the things that they're going through. And then we don't want to create a negative experience for the people that we care about. There's all kinds of tangled up dynamics that occur. And I think that, being able to talk about them and air them out and also explore these things maybe reduces some of the shame around talking about them. And also, anytime you do that, you open up the opportunities, for our desires to expand and to step into greater alignment with whatever those desires may be.